I was halfway through breakfast with my kids when I heard my wife say, clear as day, "Logan can't even hear himself being pathetic." She was laughing, and so was Tristan. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding, my hearing recently restored but still not revealed to anyone. They didn't know I could hear everything now. The room spun, not from shock but from confirmation. It wasn't just cheating. It wasn't just lies. It was contempt. And it had been there for years, shielded behind soft smiles and curated family photos. At that moment, my silence wasn't a disability. It was my greatest weapon. I realized something else, too. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a reckoning. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. It was a Thursday morning in April, warm light pouring through the glass walls of our brickle penthouse, the hum of the espresso machine, the casual clinking of utensils against bone china. My daughter Arya was in her uniform, flipping through sheet music at the breakfast bar. My son Reed had his head buried in a bowl of cereal, legs swinging beneath the tall stool. Across the kitchen island, Maurice, my wife, smiled sweetly as she texted someone with practiced ease. I was still adjusting to sound. It had been just over a week since the implant surgery succeeded. My hearing had returned, not gradually, not like a fade in. One moment, there was silence. The next, a sudden flood of sound. After years of nothing but vibrations and guesswork, I could hear again. But I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. I had my reasons. My recovery had been declared private. Maurice insisted on telling friends that I was resting, adjusting, processing. I let her. I stayed quiet, pretended to still live in that muted world, until that morning. I had walked back inside to grab a file I'd forgotten on the counter, my footsteps silent thanks to the thick custom carpeting. The kids didn't see me. Neither did Maurice. She was standing near the hallway, on the phone with Tristan Conrad, her longtime design collaborator. Her voice, syrupy and low, drifted into the open air. "Logan can't even hear himself being pathetic." She laughed. A pause. "No, he just nods and smiles like a grateful little project. It's honestly perfect. I don't even have to try anymore." I froze. And then came Tristan's voice, sharp, too close, too loud on speaker. "It's just the role he plays, filler husband. Decorative silence. Let him hold your purse while you rule the room." They laughed. Both of them. It was the first full sentence I'd heard Maurice speak aloud since my hearing returned, and it shattered something in me, not because of what was said, but because I realized how long it had probably been going on. I stepped back silently, file in hand, retreating to the elevator lobby outside our unit. My heart beat faster than it had in years, but my mind was steel. That was the moment the marriage ended for me, not with fury, not with confrontation, but with clarity. I'd spent years watching her from the outside of sound, reading her lips, her eyes, her careful hands. Now, with sound returned, I could see just how far I'd been excluded. Later that day, I returned to the world with the performance intact. I smiled as she pecked my cheek in front of Arya. I offered to drive Reed to piano lessons. I even made dinner reservations for the weekend. But inside, I was calculating. My silence had become my armor. Back when I lost my hearing, just days after a construction site mishap damaged my inner ear, the adjustment was brutal. No one teaches you how to be deaf overnight, especially not when you're managing a rising design consultancy and raising 2 kids with a woman who thrives on conversation and visibility. Maurice had handled it, publicly. She organized a benefit event in honor of awareness, got features in 2 local magazines, and spoke with rehearsed emotion about navigating life beside a strong but struggling man. Privately, she drifted. The less I spoke, the louder her world became. Loud clothes, loud social circles, loud opinions. She joined private clubs, threw fundraisers with Tristan as her co-host, all while insisting she was still so committed to family. I wanted to believe her. For a while, I did. Even when I noticed Arya pulling away, even when I found Reed clinging closer to the nanny than to his mother, even when she started sleeping in the guest bedroom, because my restlessness keeps you up. The disconnect grew quietly, invisibly, like rot behind drywall, and I kept smiling, adjusting, trying to hold it all together. But that morning, that single overheard conversation, recalibrated everything. That night, I sat with Arya while she practiced her least etude. Her fingers were nimble, her technique refined. She was gifted, not just trained, but her jaw was tense. She didn't smile anymore while playing. That used to be her joy. Beautiful phrasing, I told her. She looked up, startled. You heard that? I nodded. I've been hearing things again, sweetie. I haven't told anyone yet. Her eyes widened. Then, cautiously, even Mom? I shook my head. She paused, then quietly turned back to the piano. Maybe wait a little longer, she whispered. My chest tightened. Why? She shrugged. It's just... She doesn't know how to stop talking when people aren't listening. The next morning, I drove Reed to school. He chattered happily from the back seat about soccer and Pokemon cards. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, studying him. 10 years old, a heart too big for his small frame. Daddy, are you okay? Why do you ask? You look like when you used to try to hear things, even when you couldn't. I smiled. I'm better now, buddy. Just thinking. Reed's face lit up. Can you hear my voice again? I can, loud and clear. He didn't ask if I'd told Mom. He just nodded and looked out the window. That was enough. Over the next week, I gathered. I met with my lawyer, Jonas Meyer, in private. Told him everything. What I'd heard, what I suspected, what I feared. He didn't flinch, just took notes and asked sharp, surgical questions. You're going to need proof. Real proof. Digital, financial, testimonial. You up for that? I've been up for worse. Jonas nodded. Then let's begin. At home, I played the part. I kissed Maurice's forehead in public, attended a gala with her at the Four Seasons. She wore a floor-length crimson dress that turned every head in the room, and I smiled through every fake compliment. Tristan was there too, of course, hovering, smirking, brushing past me with the entitlement of someone who thought he'd already won. But I had time on my side. And now, I had sound. That night, in our bedroom, Maurice was scrolling through Instagram when she sighed dramatically. I need a break, Logan. I've been thinking we could take a week apart. You know, space. Maybe I'll stay at the spa in Palm Beach. I turned from my side of the bed, studying her. Sure, I said calmly. A break sounds healthy. She blinked. That wasn't the response she expected. No panic, no pleading. I smiled. Let me know when you leave. She hesitated, then nodded. Maybe Monday. That gives me time to pack your things. Her head snapped toward me. I meant just some space. Not... I stood. Maurice, if you want a break, take it. Fully. She looked stunned. The power she'd assumed would remain in her hands was quietly, invisibly slipping away, and she didn't even know why. The next day, I installed discrete audio sensors, legally sanctioned for shared property. With Jonas's advice and technical support, I collected a week's worth of candid exchanges, phone calls, meetings with Tristan. Her voice dripping with mockery, detailing her plans to quietly phase Logan out, how she and Tristan had been the real duo all along, how they'd use their new firm to secure social leverage and then end things on good terms for the kids' sake. It was cold, clinical, strategic, but above all, clear. With every word I heard, the pity I once had for Maurice drained. She hadn't stumbled into betrayal. She'd plotted it. Jonas smiled when I sent him the files. This is more than enough. Custody won't be a debate. It'll be a procession. And Tristan? Jonas leaned back in his chair. Let's just say designers don't do well with exposed reputations and terminated client contracts. On Sunday, Maurice packed a gold leather overnight bag and kissed the kids goodbye. Just some self-care, loves. I'll call every day. She didn't look at me as she left, and I didn't stop her. Instead, I walked into my study, shut the door, and opened a folder labeled simply, Restoration. It contained everything: audio logs, financial trails, calendar overlaps, receipts for hotel rooms, even voice messages Aria had quietly recorded from Tristan's drunken conversations at galas. I wasn't going to destroy them. I was going to free us. Every piece of that folder was a truth she could no longer deny. Every document, a crack in the perfect image she built while I lived in silence. This time, I was the one listening. The walls have ears. The day after I overheard Maurice and Tristan mocking me in my own home, the silence became heavier than it ever had been when I was deaf. That morning, I played along. Aria rushed past me in the hallway with her headphones in, barely offering a glance. Reed was already seated at the breakfast bar, lazily spooning cereal into his mouth, kicking his feet under the stool. Maurice walked in 5 minutes later, hair still wet from the shower, and gave me that familiar half-smile she reserved for performance. It was all so normal, and yet I knew everything had changed. I pretended not to hear the sound of her phone buzzing with a message. I watched her glance at it, smile, and tuck it away quickly. I could guess who it was. But I didn't ask. I wasn't ready to break my silence. Not yet. I needed more. I needed undeniable. So I waited. That week, I became the perfect ghost, present in the background, silent in every moment. But inside, I was cataloging. Every laugh behind closed doors, every hurried phone call she thought I couldn't hear, every name she whispered when she thought I was out of range. Tristan's name came up more often than I expected. Not just as a friend, not just as a creative partner. No, there were details. Intimate details. One night, while she was in the shower, I slipped into her office. I had memorized the sound of her passcode just by listening. One short click, 2 longer ones, 9 to 5, 2. Her phone was there, open, unlocked. She was careless. That was her weakness. The message thread with Tristan was a war zone. Pictures, videos, jokes about me, cruel, cutting things. She called me the silent wall, said that it was easier to lie because I wouldn't question anything. Tristan responded with voice notes, half whispered in that sickening tone of faux sympathy. Poor Logan, still trying to be the hero in a story no one's reading. I saw red, but I stayed calm. I forwarded every file to a hidden drive. I took screenshots. I even recorded the message playback with my own device. Dates, times, proof, but I didn't confront her. That night, I lay next to her in bed as she scrolled on her phone. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I listened as she recorded a voice note and sent it to him, laughing quietly into the pillow. We'll be free soon. He doesn't even suspect a thing. I kept my breathing even. She didn't know she'd just given me the final nail. The next day, I met with Jonas Meyer. Jonas had been my attorney back when I negotiated a licensing deal with a major commercial developer. He was sharp, cold when necessary, and the one person I could trust to play the long game. When I told him what I had, and more importantly, what I had heard, he leaned back in his leather chair and just said, "Then we don't just win, we bury them." That week, I filed a quiet petition for temporary legal separation under the grounds of infidelity and emotional endangerment to our children. And I made no move at home. I played the same silent role. But behind the scenes, I began building a fortress. I reactivated my personal accounts, locked down our joint finances, and froze access to the trust funds she didn't even know I controlled. The trust set up under my father's name was never hers to touch, but she had assumed it was mutual wealth. That was her second mistake. Still, I kept my ears open. One night, Maurice was on a FaceTime call in the guest room. She thought I was in the garage working on some wood project. I wasn't. I was in the hallway, again, listening. She was in lingerie. "Can't wait for the Palm Springs weekend," she whispered. "Logan thinks it's a girls' retreat. I'll be all yours for 3 nights. Tristan chuckled on the other end. "That villa is soundproof. Let's make some noise for once." Maurice laughed. "He won't hear it anyway." I walked back to the garage before she came out. I carved nothing that night. Just stood over the workbench, breathing through the fire in my chest. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school. Arya gave me a tight-lipped nod. Reed hugged me longer than usual. I told them I loved them. I meant it with everything I had. Then, I waited for Maurice to leave. Once she was out, I called Jonas. "It's time." He filed the full suit: adultery, emotional abuse, parental manipulation, and custodial neglect. We had voice recordings, text records, travel logs, all perfectly legal, all collected after my hearing was restored, and all documented with timestamps. Jonas moved fast. The hearing was scheduled 3 weeks from the filing, but Maurice didn't know any of this. Not yet. And then came the Palm Springs trip. That weekend, I drove the kids to their grandparents, my side of the family. Maurice had arranged for them to stay with her friend in the city, but I made alternate arrangements. She didn't check. I stayed in the city, monitoring. Jonas had hired a private investigator to document the villa, the behavior, the contacts. Pictures were taken. Tristan and Maurice arriving together, checking in under a fake surname. Poolside kisses. Bedroom shadows behind drawn blinds. Dinner dates, hand in hand. 3 days later, when Maurice came home, I was at the kitchen counter, helping Reed with a school project. She kissed his head, then looked at me. "You're quiet," she said casually. "Nothing new," I replied, smiling slightly. "Palm Springs was nice?" I asked. Her eyes twitched just a little. "Yeah, girls' weekend, spas and champagne." I nodded. "Hope you got what you needed." That night, she tried to initiate intimacy. I declined. Said I was tired. She didn't push. She never did. That was the unspoken boundary in our marriage, the one she kept because she was getting everything she wanted elsewhere. The next morning, a courier arrived with legal documents. I handed them to her wordlessly. She opened them in the hallway. I watched from the living room. Her fingers trembled as she read the name on the header. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Logan Pierce, Fav. Maurice Vale. She walked toward me, eyes wide, lip curled. "What is this?" "I'm divorcing you." You can't just..." She stammered. "We can talk about this. I thought we were..." "I heard everything, Maurice." She froze. "What do you mean? Heard what?" "Your calls, your late-night laughs," Tristan's voice. I've had my hearing back for weeks. The blood drained from her face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You spied on me? No. I listened. That's not a crime. You can't use that in court. It's all legal and admissible. Every word you thought was hidden. It wasn't. Maurice dropped onto the couch, shaking. You set me up. No, you buried yourself. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard, and I let it stretch. Over the next few days, she begged, threatened, cried, and yelled. I said nothing except what was necessary. Jonas instructed me to maintain neutrality, emotionless, composed. And I did. Reed asked if Mommy was sick because she cried a lot. I told him she was just tired. Arya asked nothing. But I caught her staring at me more often now, as if trying to figure out if I was different. I was. I just didn't show it. A week before the hearing, Jonas met with me again. We'll win custody, full custody if you want it, but we also need to decide whether to go public with the recordings. What happens if I do? She'll be finished socially. Her image in elite circles depends on discretion and status. A leak would destroy that. I thought about it, not out of vengeance, but clarity. She'll lose Arya, I said. Our daughter's already pulling away. Jonas nodded. Sometimes justice costs something. I shook my head. Not Arya. Not like this. So we kept the recordings sealed, presented only in court, under closed proceedings. The judge reviewed the full record privately. The reaction was immediate. When Maurice tried to cry in court, the judge interrupted her. I've reviewed the documented proof of deceit, endangerment, and neglect. The petitioner has demonstrated consistent presence and concern for the children. You, Ms. Vale, have not. Her attorney fumbled through his rebuttals. Nothing landed. The verdict was handed down. Full legal and physical custody awarded to Logan Pierce. Visitation rights contingent upon psychological review and supervised terms. Maurice broke down in the courtroom hallway afterward, screaming, You ruined me! No, I replied. You did that, I just listened. Jonas shook my hand. You handled this better than most. It wasn't about winning, I said. It was about being present. It's amazing what you hear when people think you can't. The morning after I overheard Tristan and Celeste mocking me, I sat at the kitchen island, pretending to scroll my phone while they moved about in their usual choreography of fake routine. Tristan was still around, still in my house, having the audacity to sip coffee out of one of my company's branded mugs. The same ones I designed back in 2017 when my architecture firm landed its first major contract with a high-end condominium project on South Beach. Celeste had always said she was proud of those mugs. Now, she didn't even look at them. They didn't know I had my hearing back. They didn't know I was already listening, cataloging, organizing. Tristan mumbled something under his breath as Celeste walked past him. She laughed, too softly for anyone else to hear. But not for me. I caught every word. Celeste told him, He's just background now. Don't let it get to you. A few more weeks, and I'll have the legal grounds to shift everything. Everything. The house. My kids. My name, my work, my reputation, my life. I gripped the mug tighter and forced myself to smile at the floor. That day, I made a call to Alex Calderon, my college roommate and now an aggressive, shark-like attorney who handled white-collar divorces for the rich and vicious in South Florida. Alex wasn't surprised. You deaf or not, man. You've always been 3 steps ahead, so let's use that. I told him everything. What I heard, what I suspected, what I knew. He laughed. Logan, you've been given a gift. You've got something no other man in your position has. Surveillance that no one suspects. Use it. And I did. Over the next few days, I played the part of the passive, detached husband. I kept pretending I hadn't heard the filth Celeste and Tristan spewed when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I nodded along, made eye contact, even smiled. But every night, I reviewed the recordings I made. I had begun wearing a new smartwatch that allowed discreet voice memos. Whenever I was near them, I'd tap twice to start recording and keep still. Alex had instructed me on how to store and timestamp everything. "This is going to be big," he told me one evening. "You're building a case not just for divorce, Logan. You're building a case for full custody, reputation control, financial advantage." But it wasn't just about custody, or finances, or exposure. It was about something deeper, something old, something I hadn't realized was buried inside me until I began hearing again. It was the humiliation, the years of being made small, of being treated like someone less than, of being invisible. The first explosion came from someone I didn't expect, Sienna. It was a Friday evening, just after dinner. Celeste had been short with her all day, correcting her tone, criticizing her outfit. When Sienna finally snapped and said she wanted to spend the weekend with me, Celeste nearly slapped her. "Don't you dare talk to me like I'm one of your friends," Celeste snapped. "You're under my roof." "That's Dad's roof," Sienna cut in, eyes flashing. Tristan was in the next room, clearly listening but pretending not to be. I stayed seated, unmoved. This was a moment I needed to witness. Celeste grabbed Sienna's arm hard. "You're grounded." "For what?" Sienna yanked her arm back. "For not siding with your fake little narrative." "Sienna!" Celeste shouted. But Sienna wasn't done. "I know what's going on. I've seen the texts. I'm not stupid." Silence. Thick, choking silence. Celeste turned pale. She knew. I waited until later that night when Sienna came to my home office and closed the door behind her. "I read her phone, Dad," she said, voice trembling. "I only did it because I felt like something wasn't right. And it's not just cheating. She says awful things about you. She told Tristan you were weak, pathetic, a burden." I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I took my daughter's hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me." She looked up at me with the kind of clarity that slices through generations of lies. "I want to live with you." And that's when it changed, from strategy to mission. Alex began drafting the first motion that weekend. We filed under confidentiality, attaching limited but damning preliminary evidence. But the real evidence, the recordings, the texts, the financial manipulations, was still being gathered. He said to wait. "Build it brick by brick, Logan. We'll break them in court, not before." But life wasn't going to wait. Tristan, in his idiotic hubris, made a move that forced my hand. He took Micah out of school early one afternoon, without telling either me or Celeste, drove him to his private gym and let him hang out with the guys. Celeste found out hours later and tried to smooth it over, saying it was just an innocent gesture. But Micah told me something different. "He said you don't like fun, Dad. That you wouldn't let me do cool stuff. He said he's going to be my stepdad soon." I had to leave the room. I was shaking too hard. When I confronted Celeste, she didn't apologize. She shrugged. "You're overreacting. Tristan's trying to bond with them. Maybe if you weren't so emotionally sterile, they'd prefer you." I had to clench my jaw to keep from yelling. That's when I knew we needed to escalate. Alex filed an emergency petition the following Monday. Formal request for temporary custody adjustment based on emotional endangerment. The recordings came out, the texts, the triangulations. The judge agreed to a closed hearing within a week. And that week, it was war. Celeste stopped sleeping in the same room. Tristan stayed over more often. But something began to shift. Sienna was distant with her. Micah wasn't eating well. Even the housekeepers looked uneasy. I didn't speak unless I had to. I stayed calm. I let them make the noise. And then, 3 days before the hearing, Celeste exploded. She cornered me in the kitchen after dinner, her tone sharp and poisonous. "You think you're going to win? You think your little martyr act is going to undo the years I've spent cleaning up after you, managing you?" I just looked at her. She hated that. "You were deaf and pathetic. You couldn't even carry your own in public. I had to do it all. And now you get your ears fixed and think you're some kind of messiah?" I turned to walk away. She grabbed my arm. "You're not going to take them from me." And that's when I said it. "You already gave them away." She froze. I leaned in and whispered, "You don't know what I've heard, Celeste. But you will." The court hearing was silent, intense, and brutal in its clarity. The judge, a stern, observant man named Barris, reviewed the audio files with tight-lipped discomfort. When he looked at Celeste, his eyes were colder than I expected. "She called you a liability," he said, reading from the transcript. "Said, he's not even a man anymore. And this was said in front of your children?" I nodded. He turned to Celeste. "You understand the gravity of emotionally manipulating your children against their father, especially while cohabiting with an extramarital partner?" Celeste's lawyer, some boutique Beverly Hills import, tried to redirect. But the judge raised a hand. "I'm issuing a temporary sole custodial order in favor of Mr. Pierce. The children will remain primarily in his residence until a formal custody determination. Ms. Pierce, you may file a rebuttal within 14 days, provided you can demonstrate this arrangement harms the children more than your continued relationship with Mr. Chandler." The gavel cracked. It was done. For now. The ride home was quiet. Sienna sat beside me, texting. Micah played a game on his tablet. No one asked where Celeste was. No one mentioned her name. That night, I sat alone in my home office and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something deeper, something heavier. Vindication, maybe. But also grief, for the years I'd lost, for the love I thought I had, for the illusion I let define my life. Alex called around midnight. "You're halfway up the mountain, Logan. Don't stop now." I didn't plan to. I stood by the glass railing of my penthouse balcony that evening, the Miami skyline sparkling below like a lie too pretty to be real. I had seen too much by now to be fooled by appearances. Inside, Liana was helping Lacey settle down for the night. I could hear the soft hum of her voice, gentle, maternal, everything Serafina once pretended to be. Lacey had become quieter these past few weeks. She'd ask fewer questions, but when she did, they struck deep. "Why did Mommy say you made her cry?" Or, "Why can't we all be in the same house anymore?" I'd answer softly, carefully. But beneath that calm tone, a storm brewed. My daughter's innocence was collateral damage in a war she never asked to be part of. I'd begun preparing for the full storm. But now it was time to escalate my side of the fight. I had kept quiet for too long. The moment the private investigator sent me the footage of Sterling and Serafina entering a hotel on Collins Avenue at 11:46 p.m. and exiting at 3:22 a.m., my breath didn't catch. It slowed. It didn't surprise me anymore. They were sloppy, entitled, arrogant, and they'd underestimated me for the last time. I didn't rush to confront them. That's what they would expect. Instead, I quietly retained Harlow Grant, a brutal but brilliant attorney with the kind of courtroom demeanor that turned opposing counsel into puddles. I gave her the footage, the private message threads I'd intercepted when Serafina forgot to log out of her iCloud on the shared iPad, and the audio recordings I'd captured after installing mics in our townhouse before I moved out. When I showed Harlow the clip of Serafina laughing with Sterling about how Logan probably thinks I'm still in therapy, she leaned back and said, "We're not just going to take her down, we're going to salt the earth she walks on." I knew Serafina would notice soon that I wasn't reacting. that I wasn't calling or texting or sending long-winded emotional pleas. That silence, it was bait, and she took it. She invited me to a co-parenting dinner at a rooftop restaurant she always loved, the same one where I had once surprised her with a birthday proposal and a string quartet. Now she sat across from me in a silk dress that shimmered under candlelight, fake sincerity smeared across her smile. "Logan," she said with breathy warmth, "I know things have been hard. I think we can fix this for Lacey." She reached out to touch my hand. I let her. "You mean, you think I might still be in the dark?" I said, staring her straight in the eyes. "And you're testing the waters to see how much you can manipulate before I break." The smile slipped for just a moment. "You're paranoid." "No, I'm awake. And very, very focused." Her hand withdrew. "I don't know what you think you know," she said. "That's the beauty of it," I replied. "You're going to find out exactly how much I know in front of a judge." She lost her appetite. The next few days unfolded with surgical precision. My legal team filed for temporary primary custody, citing emotional instability, abandonment of parental duties, and consistent exposure of our daughter to inappropriate adult behavior. We submitted hard evidence, not just speculation. Time-stamped video. Screenshots. Witness statements. Neighbors who had seen Sterling's car parked outside the house overnight. A housekeeper who overheard Sterling shouting at Lacey when Serafina was in the shower. What made the case ironclad wasn't just the proof, it was the contrast. Me, Logan Pierce, full-time single father, steady income, no criminal record, and a rock-solid timeline of care. Serafina responded with rage and panic. She tried everything. Fake tears at the mediation session, accusing me of weaponizing my disability against her, even claiming I forged some of the texts. But she didn't expect me to bring in the clinic records from the ear restoration surgery, not for sympathy, for clarity. When I told the court I'd heard my wife call me a walking ATM with no flavor, it wasn't hearsay. It was lived truth. I remember the judge watching her expression twist as I repeated her exact words from the footage. "Logan's so boring. I'd rather fake sleep than let him touch me." Sterling had laughed. The judge didn't. I knew the court system favored mothers, statistically, emotionally, but I also knew it favored consistency, clarity, and proof. And I came armed with all three. Lacey was assigned a guardian ad litem, who after just 3 visits noted in his report that Lacey seemed noticeably calmer and more expressive in my home, while appearing confused and emotionally unsettled in her mother's. When Serafina caught wind of the report, she exploded. "You poisoned her against me!" she screamed at me outside the courthouse. I stayed calm, always calm. "No," I said. "You did that. I just refused to cover for you anymore." The public collapse started at the charity gala. It was a high society event, a fundraiser for pediatric cochlear implant research, ironically. The event where Serafina had planned to walk in with Sterling and debut him publicly as her new partner, carefully airbrushing the betrayal into a glamorous love story. But I got there first. With Liana on my arm and Lacey beaming in a tiny black and gold dress, we didn't make a statement. We were the statement. Sterling froze. Serafina looked like she swallowed glass. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. I let the whispers do their work. Miami's elite crowd thrives on secrets, but they feast on exposure. And Serafina, once the darling PR queen, had suddenly become gossip fodder. Sterling tried to bluff it through. But his firm? They didn't care for drama. Especially when Harlow sent them a cease and desist letter referencing misconduct and pending testimony from Sterling's ex-husband, who had a few things to say about Sterling's habit of seducing wealthy married clients. By the end of the month, Sterling was unemployed and being investigated for ethical violations. Serafina spiraled. She started missing visitation pickups, then blamed me for turning Lacey against her. Her lawyer tried to argue emotional distress, but that defense doesn't work when you're the one lighting the fire. The day the court granted me full legal and physical custody of Lacey, Serafina didn't even show up. She sent a one-line email. "Tell Lacey I love her. I can't do this anymore." I didn't reply. There was no satisfaction in her collapse, no gloating in Sterling's fall from grace, but there was peace in the aftermath. I had rebuilt my life not by revenge, but by truth, and that truth had weight. The next week, I stood in front of my firm's executive board and accepted the offer to become their youngest ever managing partner. The bonus alone would cover Lacey's education through college. At night, I'd tuck her in with stories, not fairy tales, but lessons. And when she'd ask, "Daddy, why aren't we with Mommy anymore?" I'd answer gently, "Because I chose to protect you, even when it hurt." And one day, she'd understand what that meant. The moment I stepped into the boardroom that morning, something inside me felt sharper, like my senses were aligning faster than they had in years. The slight rustle of fabric, the distant vibration of a muted phone, the nervous shuffle of someone trying to remain unnoticed. I'd always relied on instinct before I lost my hearing. But now, I had both instinct and information, and that was dangerous. For them. Celeste was seated 2 chairs away, speaking softly into her phone. I caught every word. "He's not as clueless as he used to be. I don't know. It's like he's watching me differently." Pause. "No, I haven't told Matthias yet." That name, Matthias. Again. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, but I took note. There was more going on than just infidelity. And I was going to find out every twisted detail. That afternoon, I walked out of an upscale cafe near Brickell City Center with my lawyer, Bryce Henley, a quiet bulldog in an Armani suit who didn't believe in unnecessary movement or wasted time. We'd gone over everything: prenups, property holdings, shared accounts. There were cracks already. Celeste had moved $37,000 from one joint account into a consulting escrow 3 weeks ago. For what? Consulting Matthias? "Get a forensic audit team on this," I told Bryce. He nodded. "Done. Also, I reached out to the private investigator you mentioned. He's got something already. You'll want to see it." We walked to the parked SUV. Bryce handed me a folder. I took a breath and opened it. Inside were high-resolution photos. Celeste in gym attire, but she wasn't going to the gym. She was stepping into the penthouse at the SLS Lux. Matthias opened the door. He kissed her. On the lips, on the cheek, on the forehead. The timestamps were damning. Patterns. Tuesdays, Fridays. Twice on a weekend, I was out of town for a speaking engagement. I swallowed the acid rise in my throat. This wasn't just sex. This was regular, rehearsed, intimate, and premeditated. I turned the last page. There was a photo of Matthias, not just some pretty fitness coach or barista or random fling. No, Matthias Quinn. I knew that name. His face was familiar too. Former startup golden boy turned lifestyle guru, famous for his men's retreat podcast, Awaken the Fire Within. And there he was, wrapped in my wife's arms, in my city, sleeping in sheets I helped pay for. I leaned against the door. He's using her. For image, access, money. Bryce gave me a sharp glance. "Are you sure?" "Oh, I'm not guessing. Celeste thinks she's in control, but this guy's not interested in her. He's interested in everything she got through me." That night, I came home to a table half set, the kids upstairs, and Celeste humming softly to herself in the kitchen. The same woman who had betrayed me physically, emotionally, and now financially was making risotto like everything was fine. She turned and smiled, like nothing was burning behind her eyes. "You're home early?" I looked at her for a long beat. "Yeah. Meetings wrapped sooner than expected." She came closer, put a hand on my chest. "You okay?" I paused, then kissed her forehead gently. "Yeah," I said. "I'm just seeing things more clearly these days." She laughed softly. "That new surgery's really changed you." If only she knew. The next morning, I drove our daughter Laya to school. She was quiet in the back seat, unusually withdrawn. I adjusted the rear-view mirror. "You okay, sweetheart?" She looked up. "Are you and Mom mad at each other?" I froze, then pulled the car over. "Why do you ask that?" "I heard her talking on the phone at night. She said you were boring now, that you just sit around and listen and don't say anything anymore." I felt something fracture inside, not because Celeste insulted me, but because our daughter heard it, internalized it. I reached back and touched her hand. "Laya, you know I'll always be here for you, right? No matter what." She nodded, but she looked uncertain, like a child standing on ground that no longer felt solid. I knew then, this wasn't about divorce. This was about reclaiming truth, rebuilding clarity, not for vengeance, but for preservation, for Laya, for my own sanity. The next 2 weeks became a calculated unraveling. I had Bryce file the preliminary custody motion under sealed orders, citing financial discrepancies and emotional instability on Celeste's part. No formal accusations, yet just enough to freeze our joint assets and start gathering depositions. She wouldn't see it coming. Meanwhile, I let the surveillance continue. That was when things escalated. Thursday, 6:13 p.m. Celeste's voice on a recorded call. "You know I only married him because I thought he'd open doors for me. I didn't think I'd be stuck with a guy who couldn't even hear me for most of our marriage." Laughter. Matthias responded. "And now he's just sitting around pretending to be healed. It's pathetic." Then she whispered, "Sometimes I wish he'd stayed deaf." It landed like a punch in my lungs. That sentence. That quiet, evil truth. I sat in my car in the garage for a full 30 minutes, hands frozen on the steering wheel. That wasn't just betrayal. That was cruelty. The kind that calcifies something deep in a man's chest and makes him resolute. I didn't speak to her for 2 days, not even at dinner. I smiled, played with Laya, talked about science fairs and art shows. Celeste noticed, of course, but she thought it was detachment. She thought she'd already won. She didn't realize I was laying foundation. Bryce and I filed to subpoena Matthias for a financial deposition under the umbrella of a pending investigation into misappropriated funds tied to Celeste's company. The judge approved it. Suddenly, Matthias was exposed. Publicly. On paper. On record. That was when Celeste panicked. One night, she stormed into the bedroom, eyes blazing. "What the hell are you doing?" I looked up from my laptop. "You'll have to be more specific." "You know exactly what I mean. You've frozen the trust. You had me followed." I closed the laptop calmly. "I didn't have you followed, Celeste. I had questions. And I found answers." She stared at me, stunned by the stillness in my voice. "You knew?" she whispered. "All this time?" "Since the night of the gala," I said. "And before that, if I'm being honest, you weren't exactly discreet." She sat down slowly. "Logan, it didn't mean anything." I chuckled, cold and quiet. "It meant everything. Not because of what you did, but because of who you became while doing it." She flinched. I stood. "You traded in a partner for a poster boy. You gambled our daughter's security for some illusion of awakening. I used to think I failed you, but now I see. You were never building with me. You were building beside me, planning your escape the whole time." She cried then. I watched her crumble, but I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. I didn't say a word, because that night was no longer hers to narrate. Over the next week, things unraveled rapidly. Matthias's LLC was subpoenaed again for discrepancies in branding funds that Celeste had wired. Media whispers began surfacing. Celebrity wellness guru involved in private financial dispute. Bryce made sure it stayed vague, but public enough to cause Matthias discomfort. Celeste tried to patch things with Leia, but it was too late. Our daughter had started asking questions, real ones. I didn't coach her. I didn't plant thoughts, but children are smart, and they know who's present and who's pretending. By the end of the third week, Bryce called. Matthias wants to settle privately. He's offering to sign a full affidavit admitting to manipulation, emotional and financial. Wants indemnity from Celeste's company fallout. I exhaled. Get it in writing. And Celeste? She'll fall next, not with revenge, but with truth. That's heavier. And fall she did. The final blow came during the custody mediation. Bryce presented the sealed psychological assessment from the school counselor, showing Laya's recent detachment and trust concerns. He linked it, softly but clearly, to household instability and parental inconsistency. Celeste had no rebuttal. She cried, claimed pressure, claimed trauma, but the damage was done. The mediator looked at me. "Mr. Pierce, would you consider primary custody with Celeste receiving supervised weekend visits?" I nodded. "That's what's best for our daughter." Celeste looked like she'd been gutted. I walked out into the Miami heat, not triumphant, just clear, lighter. This wasn't about destruction. This was about quiet power, about standing in truth without flinching. Celeste would go on. Matthias would fade, disgraced. But Laya? She would grow up seeing what restraint looked like, what real strength meant. I opened the door to my car. Leia was waiting in the back seat, drawing. "You okay, Dad?" I smiled. "Never better." She looked up. "Did you win?" I paused. "No, sweetheart. I didn't win. I just didn't lose. And sometimes that's more than enough." The morning of the hearing was heavy with silence, the kind that seeps into your bones, gnaws at your nerves, and forces you to breathe slower just to feel like you're still in control. I sat alone in the private room assigned to me by my legal team, surrounded by well-polished walnut walls and the soft ticking of a designer clock that reminded me how much money had been sunk into this whole process. But it wasn't the expense that gnawed at me. It was the war that was about to unfold in full daylight. I had prepared for this moment, not out of vengeance, but for survival. For Sienna and Micah. For the truth that had been disfigured by Celeste's twisted narratives and River's manipulative charm. Everything I had endured, the silence, the betrayal, the humiliation, led to this day. Evelyn entered quietly, closing the door behind her. Her eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the documents she held like she'd already seen the outcome written in the margins. "They're playing it confident," she said. "River showed up in a Tom Ford suit, and Celeste looks like she's about to receive a humanitarian award. But the mood changed the second your witness arrived." I raised an eyebrow. Melissa?" She nodded. "And she brought documentation. You were right. Celeste's manipulation went deeper than we suspected." A tight breath escaped me. I didn't smile. Not yet. When court began, the energy in the room felt staged. Celeste's team tried to position her as the misunderstood, overburdened wife. River sat behind her, his presence deliberately calculated, just close enough to look supportive, just far enough to deny intimacy. They had choreographed this narrative to perfection, but none of it would hold under scrutiny. Judge Legrand, known for her intolerance of emotional theater, leaned forward and began with a neutral tone. Let's begin with preliminary statements. Evelyn stood first. Your Honor, we are here not simply to address questions of custody and character, but to dismantle a manufactured narrative designed to alienate a father from his children, to sabotage his credibility, and to secure a false moral high ground built on betrayal. Celeste's attorney responded with polished sympathy, describing Celeste as a woman overwhelmed by emotional neglect and driven to seek companionship in a time of silence. That word, silence, kept getting weaponized. When I took the stand, I could feel Celeste's glare pierce through me like glass. Mr. Pierce, the opposing lawyer began, you've described a household where your hearing disability left you isolated. Would you say your wife made efforts to engage you despite your condition? No, I said firmly. She used my silence to shape her own narrative. I wasn't just unheard, I was erased. He leaned in. Yet she claims she spoke openly about her feelings, that she asked for emotional intimacy. Not once.
Not honestly, and I can prove that. At Evelyn's cue, Melissa took the stand. She looked nervous, but her voice did not shake. I worked for the Pierce family for 3 years. I was there when Logan underwent his cochlear surgery. Celeste didn't just fail to support him. She actively discouraged the children from celebrating his recovery. She told them not to get too hopeful. The court stirred. And did she ever suggest that Logan was abusive? Melissa shook her head. Never. In fact, she told me more than once that Logan was too gentle, that it made him boring. The room fell to a hush. Evelyn then submitted the surveillance footage Logan had legally obtained. River entering and leaving the penthouse on days when Celeste claimed to be at therapy, the intercepted messages dripping with mockery about Logan's disability. River sat back, jaw tightening. His mask cracked, but the most damning piece was still to come. Your Honor, Evelyn said, we present Exhibit 47, an email chain between Ms. Celeste Pierce and Mr. River Dunn, where they discuss coaching the children to express scripted complaints about their father to the court-appointed evaluator. Gasps. Even the judge's expression hardened. Celeste looked like she'd been slapped. In one email, Celeste wrote, "If Sienna says he made her feel invisible, that should tip things. Keep reminding her how lonely she was when he couldn't hear her." Another read, "Micah's young enough to repeat phrases. Daddy forgot my recital works. Even if it's not exact. It's emotional truth." The term emotional truth echoed like poison in the courtroom. Celeste was pale now. River's expression darkened, but he knew this was spiraling beyond damage control. The judge called for a recess, but not before instructing both attorneys to prepare for final custody arguments by the afternoon. In the hallway, Celeste approached me. "You're destroying me," she hissed, barely holding it together. "Do you think you're going to win some medal for this performance?" "I'm not here for medals, Celeste. I'm here for our kids, and I won't let you rewrite my life just to excuse your choices." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You think they'll forgive you for airing this in public? I'm not the one who made this public. You did, the day you invited your lover into our home." River didn't even wait for her. He walked ahead, shoulders squared but faltering. His confidence was cracking. Good. By afternoon, the mood had shifted. Celeste's team attempted to downplay the emails as taken out of context. River was no longer mentioned in their arguments. The judge looked unconvinced. Evelyn's closing was sharp. "Your Honor, this is not about two parents disagreeing. This is about one parent weaponizing influence, visibility, and manipulation to isolate the other. Mr. Pierce did not lose his hearing.
He lost his voice in his own home, but he never walked away. He stayed. He fought to connect with his children despite the silence forced on him. That is fatherhood. That line stayed with the judge. I could see it. And then, something unexpected. Sienna stood up, without being called. "I want to say something," she said. "Please." The room froze. Judge Legrand hesitated, then nodded. Sienna looked straight at her mother. "You told me to lie. You said Daddy didn't care, but he always did. He was the only one who showed up to the science fair even when I told him not to come." Celeste shook her head, panicked. "Sienna, baby, this isn't the—" But Sienna continued. "I was scared. I thought if I didn't listen to you, I'd lose you too. But I miss my dad. I want to go home." Celeste's face broke. River looked away, humiliated. It was over. The final ruling came a week later, but we already knew. I was awarded full legal and physical custody of Sienna and Micah. Celeste would have supervised visitation only, contingent on therapy. River was named in a restraining order barring him from contacting the children. His social media image tanked overnight. Sponsors pulled out of deals. He was done. I didn't celebrate. But I slept, for the first time in what felt like years. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent, as the final gavel struck wood. Celeste didn't cry. River didn't flinch. But I felt something more permanent than satisfaction. I felt peace. Judge Legrand's voice had been steady when she delivered her verdict. Full custody of the minors, Sienna and Micah Pierce, is hereby awarded to their father, Mr. Logan Pierce. The court finds him to be the more stable and consistent parent, both emotionally and financially. All spousal support is hereby denied based on the plaintiff's conduct and proven misrepresentation. It should have felt like victory. But in that moment, it just felt over, like a storm had finally passed, and I was standing in the wreckage, intact, but not untouched. Celeste wouldn't meet my eyes as she gathered her things. River stared at the floor, his tie twisted and damp with sweat. The very man who used to sit at my dinner table and call me brother was now just a shadow, unemployed, disgraced, and legally irrelevant. But this wasn't the end of them. Not yet. After the verdict, I didn't rush out. I sat for a while in the empty courtroom, watching the light filter through the tall windows. I thought of Sienna's first piano recital, of Micah's drawing of our family where he drew himself with my eyes. I thought of the long nights I'd spent doubting myself, wondering how far I could bend before I broke. And I realized I never broke. I held. Outside, reporters swarmed. I didn't stop to speak. I didn't owe anyone a headline. Back home in Brickell, the air felt lighter. My penthouse no longer echoed. It laughed, sang, and pulsed with the sound of my children's footsteps. Evelyn had already helped prepare their bedrooms. Sienna's walls were decorated with new paintings. Micah's room had a telescope pointing out toward the bay. That night, I stood on the balcony overlooking the lights of Miami and let the silence stretch. Evelyn joined me, her presence quiet but grounding. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I replied. "We did it. They did it. And I meant it. Because the true victory wasn't just in a ruling. It was in every moment I chose dignity over destruction. In every piece of evidence I collected without rage. In every time I said nothing while others spun lies. Days turned into weeks. And while the headlines eventually faded, Celeste and River's lives didn't recover. River's family, old money, uptight, image-obsessed, disowned him after the corporate sexual misconduct suit Evelyn helped bring forward. Turns out, mine wasn't the only marriage he'd disrupted. His trust fund froze under litigation. His business partners cut ties. He was left scrambling for relevance, offering brand deal services online and life coaching webinars. No one bit. The man who once mocked my silence was now shouting into the void for attention. Celeste. Her fall was quieter but crueler. The boutique lost investors after her affair and custody loss went public. Her name became a liability in every high-end circle she once dominated. She tried launching a podcast about rediscovering feminine strength after divorce, but it was tone-deaf and fell flat. Then came the tell-all interview she attempted, only to be publicly fact-checked with court records and countered by statements from former friends who knew the truth. Her image collapsed under the weight of her own contradictions. She messaged me once. It wasn't an apology. Just 2 words. You win. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had nothing left to give her. That part of my life was closed, like a book finally finished. I didn't need to rub salt into old wounds. I was done holding the blade. Sienna and Micah adjusted with more resilience than I expected. Therapy helped. So did consistency. So did knowing that I wasn't going anywhere. Micah once asked, "Why didn't you yell, Dad? Why didn't you break things like in movies?" I knelt beside him and answered truthfully, "Because I wanted you to see what strength looks like when it's real. Not loud, not violent, just unshakable." Sienna had stopped calling Celeste Mom for a while. I never encouraged or discouraged it. She chose on her own to rebuild a limited connection through brief calls and guarded visits. But the warmth was gone. It wasn't mine to protect anymore. It was Celeste's to earn back, and she never truly tried. At Micah's school recital, he stood on stage, trumpet in hand, and scanned the crowd before he played. When his eyes landed on me, I saw something I'll never forget. Relief, confidence, pride, the knowledge that he was loved and that someone would always show up. I clapped louder than anyone when he finished. Afterward, as we walked to the car, he asked, "You're not going to leave, right?" I squeezed his hand. "I've already stayed through the hardest part. I'm here for the rest." Evelyn stayed in our lives too, but never as a replacement, just as herself, a constant, respectful presence. She never tried to mother the kids, but she showed up. Soccer games, science fairs, quiet dinners. And when Sienna finally asked her for help with a school project, Evelyn teared up quietly in the kitchen. She knew what it meant. So did I. I rebuilt my architectural firm stronger than ever. Clients returned after seeing the integrity I maintained through public scrutiny. My designs evolved. Less about perfection, more about connection. I even hosted a gallery showcase called Structures of Resilience, inspired by my journey. The centerpiece was a model of a fractured home, held together by tension wires but standing strong. It sold in minutes. Celeste tried showing up unannounced one evening. I didn't let her in. "Logan," she said through the intercom, "I just want to talk." "We already did," I replied, "for 15 years. Then I ended the call. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. Forgiveness isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's a decision you make silently, for yourself, for your peace, for your future. And I had already made it. I'd won. But more importantly, I had healed. And that was something no court ruling could ever grant. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than vengeance. When betrayal slices through the core of a life once built on trust, it's not rage that brings clarity, but stillness. Real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to rebuild instead of retaliate, to protect rather than punish, and to choose dignity when chaos tempts you to fall apart. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was about presence, about choosing to remain when others vanish, about becoming the kind of anchor that children remember not for what he said, but for how he stayed. Healing isn't a spotlight moment. It's a slow, steady reclaiming of peace, earned in courtroom verdicts, bedtime routines, and quiet victories no one sees. In the end, some people lose you forever. Not because you hate them, but because you finally learned to love yourself enough not to return. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional journey. If this story moved you or made you reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. Until next time, take care of your peace and those who protect it. Ask ChatGPT.